It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Brenda Dietrich, the Geoffrion Family Professor of Practice at Cornell School of Operations Research. And I have a couple things to say about the various things that she has been doing over the last several years. I will try to keep this short. There is a lot we could talk about. But she studied abstract mathematics at the University of North Carolina and then went on to do a PhD at Cornell in operations research. She joined IBM in 1984, and she has been doing a lot of things at IBM in the subsequent 30 or so years, where she led IBM's mathematical research team, drove creation and deployment of math and data-based business applications across IBM. She helped define IBM's data and analytics strategy and investments, as well as, she finally made a transition to academia a couple years back, where she joined the OR school at Cornell. And at IBM, she has been she has served in several roles and has had several honors. She was appointed an IBM fellow, and she held several IBM vice president roles, including as strategist, chief technology officer for business analytics, head of emerging technologies for the Watson Group, and head of data science for IBM Consulting. She also has served as the president of Informs, which is the largest operations research professional society. And she has launched open source initiatives in operations research. She was awarded Informs Impact Prize for that. She has co-authored a book on analytics. She has served as the board of trustees for the Society of Industrial and Applied Mathematics, served on numerous National Research Council boards and studies, elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2014, and currently serves on the board for Science, Technology, and Economic Policy. We could keep going on and on about this, but I want to let her speak. So with that, please join me in welcoming Professor Dietrich.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind invitation to come back and visit Dartmouth again, and especially for that invitation being before the snow fell. That was very helpful. So what I want to talk about today with you is technology waves that I've seen in the information technology industry. The data each of these waves has created, exploited, abused, whatever. Then I want to take a little bit of a detour and talk about predicting the future, especially predicting the future in technology, and what lessons from the past can tell us about what might happen and whether or not to have faith in our predictions. And then I'm going to talk about data as a competitive advantage. In my opinion, it's the last competitive advantage left for any firm. And then some questions, some things that have been bugging me for a while, which maybe will spur some research or some other interest. Okay? So I start the story of computing when I was a small child in the 1960s, which was the mainframe era. Mainframes were deployed through top-down investment in companies. They basically automated transactions that had been done by people by hand. And they hard-coded all business logic. They aligned with business process standardization. And the business imperative, the reason people bought these computers and paid millions and millions of dollars for them was to reduce labor cost and reduce human error, right? It was a cost takeout exercise. Pay a lot now, pay very little going forward, be able to scale quickly and do things faster. But automating transactions leaves behind a lot of data that previously was written on individual sheets of paper and in individual file cabinets. It's now all there in the computer. And everyone complained about how much data there was, how hard it is to store. Do we leave it on cards? Do we put it on mag tape? You know, what do we do with it? It's a real pain. But for those who manage this data exhaust of transaction processing, they had a history from which they could predict the future. So this enabled them to do really incredible things in terms of forecasting, in terms of benchmarking, in terms of experiments to see what actually improved their business operation. And because digital data is pretty much free to share, copy, it could be used by many units simultaneously within the organization. There was also a scientific computing role in the mainframe era. This was complex calculations. This was NASA, this was DOE, this was the corporate research labs. This was certain universities that would get together and buy a mainframe and have shared computing resources for the 3 universities in the Raleigh-Durham area. The business imperative behind this, again, was we want to do the research faster. We want to do the calculations faster and more accurately. We want to enable access by many people to the same computing resources and same data. And it literally was a time-sharing model. It looks a whole lot like cloud today looks. We didn't call it cloud, we called it time-sharing. Data exhaust from the scientific computing was largely the log data. How much time did the computer spend in each part of the software? How long did it take it to do these particular operations? And that was great insight to the software developers because they knew where they had to go speed up the code. They knew where to try things like, let me just recode this piece in binary because I'm going to do it 100,000 times, get the speed out of it. And this was also the advent of using computers as toys. Computer games played on the mainframe computer in off hours when we thought no one was watching. And yes, a lot of us did it. Personal computer era starts in about 1980. There were hobby computers before then, but this is the first mass scale deployment of them. It was all about personal productivity and record keeping. These were on our desktops. We played games, of course, because that's what we do. But we also kept our family finances, right? We kept our personal records on these. And we all hated the fact that we had a very, very small hard drive, spent a lot of time deciding what to delete and what not to delete. And as a result, the data exhaust wasn't really useful. It was all distributed. It was on everybody's individual computer. Little of it was saved. Almost nothing was ever shared. These also were deployed in industry, usually at the department level, sometimes at the individual level. They were low cost. They were a cheap alternative to getting those people in IT to do anything for you. And they grew outside of the official information technology organization. And you'll see repeated this tension between individuals who want their computing accessible to them and control over it, and the IT organization that's trying to protect the enterprise, the company, the university, whatever, from all the bad things that can happen when you distribute computing and you allow anybody to do anything. So there were what we called islands of automation. There was proliferation of data, multiple versions of virtually everything. In a manufacturing company, there might be multiple versions of what our inventory is, even multiple versions of what the bill of material for a product is. And there were also vast amounts of unused computing capacity. Because when you left your office and turned your computer off at the end of the day, that capacity was there unused for 16, 14, whatever hours until you came back in the office. We use Sneakernet for data transfer. This is the guys who can run fast, taking a floppy from one computer to another. We really did call it Sneakernet. We saw some early enterprise networks. These were often proprietary methods within the walls of a building, and occasionally tapping into a big trunk line to connect different buildings that might be part of the same company. And this was there when we saw the very beginning of consumer networks. We saw Prodigy. Anybody remember what Prodigy is or was? It actually was pretty cool for its time. We saw CompuServe, we saw AOL, America Online, which my mother still uses. Then the World Wide Web. Every time I visit, I have to reset her password. It's a pain. Okay. World Wide Web. If you think from a distance, what this really did, it was it connected the worker and consumer's desktop to the mainframe enterprise system. It let me see the inventory at a store, right? It let me see what flights were available on a trip I wanted to take. It gave me a way to tap into capacity for things I might want to buy, things I might want to borrow, things I might want to just know. It sort of indexed the world's information, and that's a big sort of there, because although the index is decent, it's not adequate for many things. It's good for general purpose. It's really not good enough if you're in a deep technical area and you're trying to understand the technical literature in your area. But the World Wide Web benefited from the rapid improvements in network capacity and speed. This was the period when bandwidth got rolled out at an amazing and unpredicted rate. And this also reduced barriers to entry for any company wanting to do anything. I mean, literally 2 guys in a garage could set up a company. The web lets you transcend space. It didn't matter where you were. If you had the service and you could deliver it from the location you were at, you could set up your own company to do whatever. It resulted in this sort of hyper-informed, choice-seeking consumer, people who search before they buy, people who search a lot before they buy, which really challenged the enterprises. Enterprises really liked having consumers who didn't know very much. They made a lot more money off of them. But now with consumers who can walk into a store, scan the barcode on something, see 16 different prices for it, see 3 different committed delivery dates for it, that's hyper-informed, and it's not really what retailers like. It also, within the enterprise, created new channels for interaction with the company's own employees. So things that you used to go to a person to have done for you, you now did yourself online. All right, and you did it right most of the time, and sometimes you did it wrong, and I'm still sorting out travel expense accounts from IBM, even though I've been retired for 2 years. But it's, it again eliminated roles of people because it made everything self-service. Do it yourself, it's not that hard. It also brought in huge security issues, all right? The data that's being transmitted across the web, there was early reluctance to do things like put your credit card numbers in, but we all do it now. We all do even things like bank wire transfers, filling out our account numbers on a screen on the computer and hitting the button saying, yes, send that money. But the collection of data and the fact that companies had very detailed data about their employees and about their consumers led to a lot of significant data breaches, which still go on and continue to be a huge problem right now with personally identifiable information getting out there in the wild. But the most important thing that happened with the World Wide Web was this new business model, which said it's free to the consumer, and I, as the company setting up this service, am going to monetize screen space. Some of it's going to be for my stuff, but some of it's going to be for advertisements or sponsored or promoted stuff. And I'm going to monetize the exhaust I collect from the user interaction with the web page. So I'm going to know what you searched for. I'm going to sell that information to somebody who's going to send you ads for that thing, probably for the rest of your life. Right? So it's a very different economic model, which really wasn't imaginable at the time this stuff was happening. I remember long debates in the early 90s of what's the charge for a search going to be? All right? Is it going to be charged based on the number of things returned, the number of good things returned, the number of keywords you put in there? How many ands, how many ors? Right? The initial thinking was that search is going to be a paid-for service, like it is in systems like Lexis and Nexus for law data. Okay, social mobile cloud, 3 things that kind of came all at once in the 2000s. We blame the millennials, but probably unfairly. Basically, what was going on there was we were literally at billions of mobile devices that were capable of communicating across a network, hey, I'm here. That's the primary thing they communicated. That is of value. They say, hey, I'm here, everything's cool. With these come trillions of transactions, many of them just being the, hey, I'm here transaction, and lots of metadata about the locations. How many people go to this spot? Are they mostly guys? Are they mostly women? Are they mostly young? Are they mostly old? Do they come in groups? Do they come as singletons? How long do they stay? Right? And from that data, you can sort of figure out if this is a hair salon or a coffee shop pretty easily. So even if you don't know what the location is, you can often infer it based on who's there. We very strangely let the computing system intermediate most of our social interactions, as well as our commercial interactions. So we went from writing letters to sending email or text messages. My youngest kid only communicates through instant messenger. Literally, she does not ever call, she does not ever write an email, she messages me at the most inappropriate times. My older kids will actually write a decent email every once in a while. But all this data, every message you've ever sent, every picture you've ever taken and stored somewhere lives up there on a cloud somewhere. And it's used for various things. And so cloud was basically the time-sharing option under a disguised name. It's lots of computing capacity, lots of data storage. Pay for it by the click, right? Pay your monthly fee for your photo storage on Google. Pay your weekly fee for the computation you're doing for your experiments. It's available on demand. It makes it very affordable. There's no startup cost to getting computational power. There's no startup cost to getting storage. Those were the two biggest impediments to small companies getting into business. And the exhaust now, we have methods of trying to figure out not just what you were doing, but what you intended to do. Figuring out not just what your actions are, but what your interests are. And even creepier stuff. I think the biggest thing that was a surprise to many people who follow the information technology world is this notion of assetless enterprises. Companies that don't own anything except data and still have huge market capitalizations and sometimes some profit. These are like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. They don't own anything, right? All they own is the customer and the marketplace to get something to the driver or to the place you're staying at the Airbnb. Yet they suck off a large portion of the revenue that flows in these systems without having any assets. Now that's a cool model. If you can generate a lot of revenue without actual assets. The sharing economy, a little bit of a precursor to some of this. Before Uber was out there, there were lots and lots of small ride-sharing apps, very local, where people could post, hey, I'm driving from here to here at this time. Anybody want to ride? Not the safest thing in the world to do, but still done pretty significantly. There was couch surfing, where you post, hey, my couch is available. If someone's in town, feel free to crash on it. Again, not the safest thing to do, but popular among a certain generation. We got virtual communities around almost anything in the world. So whatever your interest is, however obscure, esoteric, creepy, you can find people who share that with you. And you can form either an open or a closed community to interact with each other. Surveillance became possible. There's always somebody watching or listening or checking up on you, and just a whole lot of extra mischief. And from a new economy's point of view, this really just meant there's a whole lot more data to monetize. Lots more data packages to make, to sell to companies that might want to utilize them. But there's also a greater ability for those of us who like to build models of how systems work, to model things at finer resolution and at a larger, more complex system. Because we can see more of the interacting pieces. Right? We can see more of the movements of people, the movements of cars, the movement of money, the forming and dispersion of communities, all sorts of cool stuff. What's going on right now, the biggest trend in the IT business, is this thing called robotic process automation. Great name, right? What it means is it's back to business process automation. It's back to the initial attempts with mainframes to fully automate business processes. The difference being, when we were doing it in the mainframe era, we wanted straightforward programmed logic, which meant first we standardized, figured out, documented, this is how this does, these are the rules of operation, and then we coded those up and had those run for each interaction, each transaction. Robotic process automation says, forget that standardization stuff, just watch. Just watch how it is done and learn the patterns. Watch how it's done. The next time a request comes in, use machine learning to figure out what the most similar previous request was, and if it was handled correctly, handle it the same way. Right? Its premise is very, very attractive to companies who don't want to go through the pain of business process standardization, who don't want to go through the pain of cleaning up all their data. The promise behind this is that it can be done based on whatever it is you happen to have collected. So if you ever call a call center, it begins by saying this call may be recorded for training purposes. They're not talking about training people. So the theory behind this is you can automate very complex knowledge-based tasks by seeing how enough smart people do them and just imitating. So once you have enough digitized examples of it being done right, the computer can just emulate that and do it right. And you notice I put in theory there, because there's not a whole lot of examples of this out there yet every company I know is trying it in lots of different places. If you've got a lot of tooling in place, so your smart people are doing what they do inside a tool that is recording their actions, that is recording what data they go look at to make their decisions, there's potential here. So I know of one investment firm that basically has horribly instrumented their traders' desktops. So every time one of their traders goes to look at a piece of data, they know he looked at that data, right? Every time their trader does a little Skype chat with someone to get a piece of information before making a trade, they know when they capture that. And then they know the trade, and then they know whether the trade was a good trade or a bad trade. And they're trying to use this to instrument traders' behavior so that they can start cloning traders as software agents. No attempt is made to standardize. I don't know if this is good or this is bad. I know it's bad for the consultants who like to go out and standardize processes because they have less work to do. But I also think it's bad because for most processes within an enterprise, there is known somewhere the way this should be done. It's not necessarily the way it is done, but it is known, we think it operates this way. And one of the biggest kind of personal data points I've observed is when I talk with companies, work with them who are trying to do this, they are routinely surprised by how stuff is actually done. The senior leadership thought it was done differently. They're very surprised at how long things take. They're very surprised at the handoffs that happen between people, the department to which a task might get sent, et cetera. So in theory, this tooling, it's essentially recording collective human intelligence, right? The promise behind this is not that these things will work out of the box perfectly. The promise behind this is these things will very quickly learn how to do things right, and you will only have to correct them a small, finite number of times. Now, any of you who are parents know that people are capable of doing the same wrong thing a very large number of times, right? Correcting them once doesn't help. Correcting them twice doesn't help. And further, if you're parents of multiple children, you know that finally getting one kid to understand the right way to do something has no effect on the other kids. So the beauty behind this, and the reason it has a lot of appeal in the marketplace, is this notion that it can be the collective intelligence of the enterprise. You figure out the right way to do it, and it's always then done that right way forever forward, right? As opposed to everybody comes in and has to learn their own thing. There are limited examples of success in this. The places it probably works best are on narrow domain chat box for service on an appliance, a cell phone, asking a question on filling out your tax forms and things like that, where it's very simple and it's clear what the right answers are, and there's probably only one right answer, and it's pretty easy to just draw an FAQ tree, and all you have to then do is recognize the question and point to the right answer. There's also a huge amount being spent on this, and nobody's talking about the failures. All right, and I think we learn a whole lot more from failures than we learn from successes. So I poke around as much as I can to try to learn about the failures on this. Okay, so it's automation. You capture the outcomes, the sequence of outcomes. You capture the sequence of actions, you capture the outcome, you score the outcome good or bad, you try to repeat actions that lead to good outcomes, you try to stop actions that lead to bad outcomes in the bud. That's the story behind it. In theory, these learn continually. So even as, say, the product suite that you're offering services on evolves and changes, you only have to ask questions about the new version of this particular phone a small number of times before it's learned the right answer and always gives the right answer after that. And it institutionalizes the best, and it helps you not make common mistakes over and over and over again. And this trend in industry is probably going to run, I would estimate, through about 2026, before we have either definitive failures and people give up, or enough examples of success that we know exactly where to apply it, and it's been applied in all those places. Right now, it's still in the experimentation, feeling your way through it phase. So all of those on one giant slide here, nothing to say, except some observations about these technology waves. So each model of computing, and they've all been different. They're different in terms of hardware, they're different in terms of software, they're different in terms of interaction mode. They all leave behind a lot of data. And in most cases, the data is related to, but not necessarily part of the transaction that happened as part of this. Right? So when I'm having the conversation with the chatbot about my new phone and what I don't understand about it, ultimately we either decide I did something wrong and now it works, or it doesn't work at all, I'm sending it back. That's the transaction. All of the dialogue up front before we get to that decision and action point is also saved and is also relevant. The big example we talk about is the search before the buy, right? The look to book ratio in airlines. How many times did you look for a flight before you actually booked one? The try to buy, if you're looking at the types of products. The exhaust actually helps you understand what your customers are actually looking for. It helps you streamline your processes for responding to your customer. It can lead to new business models. So search led to not only algorithms to optimize the search algorithm itself, so it usually found the right stuff, but the second wave of that was search engine optimization, which means putting the right magic words somewhere in your web page so your web page comes up when someone searches on the term you want to appear under. So it worked both ways. It worked, let's search and find things that are relevant, and then there's the nefarious side of it, let's make my thing relevant even though it really isn't because I want it to appear at the top. So you get this tension going back and forth, right? It can lead to companies designing new products as well as just placing ads. But it really only works for those who get there and do it quickly. Followers almost never win in this business, right? There's a reason why there's 1 or 2 main email providers that we use in our personal lives. There's a reason there's only a small number of social networks, and for every new one that comes in and seems to gain traction, one seems to disappear and fade away. The question I always ask is the data enough? And should we just replace all intelligence or I work in mathematical optimization, optimization-driven decision-making by just data-based approaches? Is that the right way to go forward? Should we forget about all this math stuff and all this theory of management stuff and all the things you're learning here and just learn from examples of what's been done in the past? And if you decide to go down this data-driven route, how much data is enough and how much data is good enough? You've got quantity issues, you've got quality issues, and I'll talk about both of these in just a minute. What does good enough, big enough depend on? How accurate do you want to be? And then the thing that probably bugs me the most about this is experimentation is really important. And yes, there are machine learning techniques and deep neural net techniques that have the neural net do its experiments. But what about experiments people do? All right, what about human creativity? What about thinking way outside the box of the rules that have been programmed into the system, which some of us really like to do? I was trying to think about value of data, and one way to think about it is there's this progression. When you do the initial automation and instrumentation, you get data coming out. It is a byproduct at that point. It's just there because you automate it. If you then use this exhaust to make better decisions, to forecast better, to staff better, all those other things, the data starts being an asset, not a liability, right? When you can augment your own data with external data that helps you understand it better, so pulling in customer databases, demographic databases, location databases, weather databases, et cetera, can provide a lot of explanatory factors that help you make better decisions. And I feel like the mic is going in and out. Is it me or is it mic's okay? Okay, all right. And then data starts to become a resource. I see a lot of companies taking their data and packaging it up and selling it as a digital product. I also see a lot of companies taking somebody else's data that they've scraped somehow and packaging it up and selling it as a digital product. And most of these companies are small enough to get away with it, but they're treading a very fine line there, and watch this space. And then there's data, not the data itself, but the insight from the data as a service, because Most of you probably have the ability to deal with very large data tables and figure out at least things like means and variances and a regression on it. Most people don't. What they want is the result of the analysis, not the data with which to do the analysis. So the data coupled with the analysis on it to provide insight about a particular thing becomes a service play. Think of it almost analogous to credit scores, right? The credit bureaus collect data, but what they report back most of the time is just a single number to someone who's asking about you. And the single number is just some method that they use to analyze and combine your data. They may combine it with data from other sources. The service is just that single number. The raw data, A, we would never want it going out to everybody in the world, and secondly, it couldn't be interpreted properly by everyone in the world. And then the final thing we see going on is people are striving to collect new and unique data sets, sometimes kind of proactively because they think it might be useful, sometimes because they have a known use for it and there's no place to get the data currently, so they put together the instrumentation to get it. And that really becomes the data as a business model. My company is all about data. That's all we care about. We're gathering it, we're refining it, we're sending it back out as either packages or services. Interesting little aside on this one, satellite data. Almost every spot on the Earth is imaged multiple times per day. And there's at least one company I know that follows weather forecast. And when a hurricane is predicted, it goes out and takes images of rooftops in the area likely to be impacted because it believes that data it can sell to insurance companies after the fact for fraud detection on claims, right? So it's proactively going to get data to in unique circumstances. I want to take a few minutes and talk about this future forecasting exercise because of everything I've done in my career, this probably changed my cognitive orientation more than anything else. So the IBM Research Division had a long history of every year producing a 10-year outlook. And this was starting actually in the 60s, but I only know about the ones from the 70s. They were remarkably good at predicting the technology of the future in terms of what would line width be on a semiconductor chip? What would density be in the storage devices? What sort of interconnections would there be between different, did I go off again? Can you help me? Okay, is that better? Nope, it's not me.
You sound better without it.
What?
You sound better without it.
Okay, fine, I'm just gonna ignore this thing. Okay. They were remarkably accurate in forecasting what computers would look like. They were remarkably poor at forecasting what we would use computers for. So in 1995, we had a fairly new CEO. He didn't come from the technology industry. He was the cookie man. And he asked this technology team to also forecast how computers would be used by our major customers. He didn't care that much about the consumer side. He wanted to know how big enterprise were going to use them. And he wanted a document that wasn't going to be used internally to drive strategy, but a document that was going to be used externally to position IBM with clients. And lucky me, I got stuck leading that team. I was very happy just doing my math, just solving production planning problems for the company, and got dragged literally kicking and screaming to headquarters to do it. Okay, so think back, those of you who are old enough, to 1995. PC sales were exploding. Laptops were just beginning to become available and popular. Digital cellular communication had been invented, but was still a relative rarity. This was a digital assistant. It was big. It was like bigger than this computer is here, and he used it as a phone. Digital cameras had been invented, but were not widespread. RFID was available. It was small. It was becoming cheaper rapidly. This is radio frequency identification. GPS was available for personal navigation, just barely. There were commercial kiosks located in different places that had internet connections as early as '91. But for many people, that was their connection to the internet. It wasn't so much from their house. It was they went somewhere and used something. In 1992, we had the first commercial transaction on the web at books.com. And we also had the IBM Simon announced as a personal communication device. '93 was the first real user-friendly web browser. I don't know how friendly Mosaic was, but it was a lot better than FTPing things all over the place. In 1994, the World Wide Web Consortium met. Netscape invented secure socket layer. We had JPEG standards in place, and we had the first e-tickets. Interestingly, what we think of as Wi-Fi was actually released at a very limited scope in 1991. It was used in Hawaii. But the Wi-Fi, as we know it today and love it today, wasn't until 1997. So networks were assumed wired. And we also had data like this, which I know you can't see particularly well. This was probably the most insightful chart I ever looked at in my life. It is looking at new technologies, everything from the flush toilet to household refrigeration to a landline, a dial tone phone, to an automatic washing machine, looking over time, and the vertical is percentage of US households that had one. Okay? So what you should notice if you stare at this for a few minutes is curves started getting a lot steeper. All right? The time between invention and critical mass deployment got a lot shorter. We also had charts like this, this is Moore's law. So these are various chips. Time is linear. Transistor count is exponential. And we had this much of the chart, and everyone said it's linear, but every single physicist I talked to in 1994 said it's only going to be linear for about 5 more years. This is what the chart looks like today. Don't believe the physicist. They keep saying there's some barrier there. It's the wavelength of light, or it's the width of an atom or something, I don't know. This is hard drive. This is storage cost. So this is sort of cost per gigabit in US dollars. Again, sort of linear, not as steep as the previous one. That's the rest of it. So going from, over $100,000 to, I don't know, maybe 15 cents in not too many years, pretty impressive. This is Nielsens Law. This is about an individual's access to the internet, access to broad connectivity. So we're starting back 1983. This is like the prodigy AOL dial-up access. This is how much of it we could, not even quite this much. I didn't put my cover sheet quite far enough. We just had these few data points at the beginning. That's the rest of the curve. Okay, and again, this is exponential on the vertical axis, linear on the horizontal axis. So we had some information about technology trends. We consulted our physicist, who never believed the physicist. We consulted industry experts. We talked to our own sellers. We talked to people from different companies, and we predicted a bunch of things. One of the things we said is we're going to have digital wallets within 10 years. And we had a really cute name for it. We called it digital cash with the $sign there. We have digital wallets, but they were way later than 2000. We predicted data and computing by the click. We called it the infosphere, right? Because it's this place, it's like the atmosphere, it's everywhere, but it's where all the information and computing lives. That's cloud. We actually drew it as clouds. We predicted self-service everything. Insurance claims, banking, check-in, check-out of hotels, check-in, check-out of flights, et cetera. We predicted optimized weather and traffic-aware routing for vehicles. Just beginning to be prevalent right now. Digitized newspapers with customized content for individuals. This is probably your customized Google News feed. You look at everything every time in the morning. We thought movies, TV, music, you'd download it for tomorrow overnight. Because what we really missed is what bandwidth was going to be to the home and what streaming was going to enable. So we thought you'd plan maybe 12 hours ahead for your movie viewing and music listening, and it would come in while you were sleeping, and then you'd have it all there for the next day. All right? So not quite, but sort of. Online customized education. Learn anything you want just by sitting at your computer screen. Virtual communities of interest. We actually saw these. We didn't think they'd be as weird as they are. Well, we thought video conferencing would be very common for social use, but we envisioned it as there would be places like a restaurant that would have a video conferencing screen at the end of the table. So I'd be at this end of the table. My daughter, who's in Maryland, would be at the table in Maryland, and we'd sing happy birthday to her, and we'd eat cake at this end, and she wouldn't have cake at her end, whatever. But that's how we thought it was going to happen for social interaction. It would be important events, fairly infrequent. We saw passengers getting updates about their flight's delay by text. In fact, we tried really hard to file a patent on this. IBM said, we're not interested, you can't file a patent through IBM on it, and anyway, 17 years have passed, so it wouldn't be of any value anyway. We also thought there'd be more deployment of smart appliances that would be aware of energy cost and sort of modulate themselves in some way. This is just barely there right now. And there's a bunch of things that happen, but not as we saw them. So we thought there'd be a home server controlling all your appliances, and that's how you got smart home. You had the server in the basement next to the furnace, right? And it held all your family data, it controlled all your lighting, all your entertainment, opened the door for your pets, etc. Not quite how it happened. It's more of this little speaker and stuff up in the cloud now, right? We thought personalized medicine based on DNA would be a lot faster than it's actually happened. This is in part a data problem in terms of the amount of data that's available in conjunction with medical treatment. We thought telemedicine and remote surgery would go farther, that you'd have physicians in, say, in New York City operating on someone in a small town in Montana, right? Now it's remote surgery, but the surgeon is literally in the next room at the robot, and the robot's working on you in the next room. We saw pay-as-you-drive insurance. This is just starting to happen, and it's happening more as a discount, not as a, for every mile I drive, there's a 3-cent charge to my insurance company. We also thought passenger transportation would become more dynamic, that we'd be able to anticipate demand and respond to it by dynamically reallocating a larger plane on this flight or a second train on this route in the morning, that there'd be a lot more flexibility in redeploying the resources once all the information about what was needed where it was available. This is not impossible to do. It's just hit an obstacle in the enterprises that own those resources. Just-in-time inventory in the home, something that monitors your refrigerator and your pantry and lets you know when you do in fact need more rice or when you do in fact need more milk, and that we really would be just in time at home, not buy it because it's on sale and stock 3 freezers, all right? We saw self-driving cars and trucks, but we saw them via an instrumented road. So our vision was only certain roads would have them. The road itself would be instrumented, and the vehicles would either be communicating between themselves directly or with some control system in the cloud somewhere. Not that they would have an artificial intelligence entity in them actually driving them through visual and auditory cues. We thought there'd be a voice interface to everything, which is finally beginning to get there, but we also thought there'd be gesture interface, right? And there'd be automatic language translation. So no matter where I am, I can speak in English and it will translate for me. And we thought face recognition would be about customer service, not about law enforcement. And probably because we made RFID chips, we thought there'd be RFID on everything. You know, RFID was going to replace barcodes. In particular, something that still doesn't exist is smart luggage and baggage handling by the airports using RFID, and that they would stop losing stuff. Okay, there were a few things we just completely and totally missed. We missed the sharing economy. We missed the assetless enterprise. We missed the whole idea that if all you did was match supply and demand, that was in and of itself a viable business model, and you could come from nowhere and start doing it. Where we thought it might occur was with the biggest player, like a big trucking company might decide to do matching loads to trucks broadly. But we didn't see it as, you know, everybody with the bedroom they're putting on Airbnb and the guy who wants to drive Uber 30 minutes a day as being part of this. We kind of missed the ads and crowd-based business model where the customer is the product. The customer is the thing that's getting monetized. We saw the dark web. We didn't think it'd be quite as dark as it is. All right, and we thought action would be taken to more isolate the dark web from us good people who don't go there. We thought there'd be more privacy regulation legislation already in the US. There's remarkably little, but we thought the things that are happening over in Europe would happen actually in the US first. We completely missed the power of location data, that many, many things are going to be able to say, hi, I'm here, constantly, and report their location and what they're doing back to some central thing. We missed social media. We saw it kind of as a consumption model. We didn't see it so much as a publication model. You know, we did not envision these YouTube stars, whatever they are. We didn't see that. We saw open source, but we thought open source would primarily be at the OS level, at the operating system, and there'd be much less of it in specialized niche areas, like optimization. And we didn't see the resurgence of artificial intelligence because, hey, that was dead, completely. The other thing we didn't see, doesn't really have a huge implication here, was we didn't see China and India going direct to cellular. We thought they would roll out wired first, because it was at the time so much cheaper than cellular. Okay, so what do these have in common? A large portion of these data is the driving factor. It's either what's produced, or it's what's consumed, or it's what's exploited. So the lessons I learned from this experience was, if you're trying to predict the future, plan for future computing and communications technology and data, not for the present. Don't let your thoughts be constrained by what exists now. Those curves, those exponential curves, there's no end in sight for them right now. Ignore the physicist when they say there is. However, not everything is going to grow exponentially. You hear stuff like the amount of data in the world, the amount of digitized data in the world is doubling every 2 months. And as a mathematician, I say, yeah, but not for long, because pretty soon that means the amount of data is going to exceed the amount of particles in the universe. So how are you going to store it? How's it going to be digitized? All right, so don't completely buy into the hype, but do look at things which you might think of as technical obstacles are probably temporary. But adoption is the thing to try to figure out. It may be a lot slower than you think it's going to be. It may be a whole lot faster than you think it's going to be. And if you can figure out things like what is the critical price point, what is a critical user group, user mass, or what's a specific obstacle to get rid of, like it's too hard to use, nobody will use it, you can accelerate it. Societal changes are going on too, and they will cause strange disruption in random places. There is a lot of privacy backlash going on right now. Not so much in the US, but it'll be here soon, and the more that we see gee whiz AI stuff causing hardships to people, like self-driving cars that kill people, like facial recognition that misidentifies someone who gets stuck in the justice system for a considerable amount of time, there will be a point at which there's going to be a backlash and regulation upon it. Data ownership's a big issue. We debate this endlessly. I should own my data. I should own my search path. I don't, Google does. And a lot of debates on what's acceptable use of location data. IBM, shortly before I left, acquired the weather company, not because we wanted to forecast weather. We acquired the weather company because it had a very good infrastructure for collecting and distributing information geospatially. It had the weather underground network, which is weather stations on people's houses and backyards that it pulled from on a regular basis. It had the weather app on your phones that it broadcast to on a regular basis. We wanted that infrastructure. But with the weather company came location data. It came the location signals off probably all of your cell phones here, roughly every 5 minutes where you were, sent to us when you have your phone plugged in and are on Wi-Fi somewhere, right? We spent a lot of time debating what is acceptable use of that. IBM has privacy policy police in it. It's got social behavioral rules it abides by. We came up with an acceptable use policy that does not disclose paths and does not disclose identity and does not disclose anything involving small numbers from which you could possibly de-identify, and still has economic value. But there are lots of companies out there that are not playing by those rules. They're willing to disclose paths, they're willing to disclose intersections of paths, they're willing to tell people where you are. Traceability of goods and services is becoming important. We like to know where our food came from. Some of us like to know whether slave labor was used to make something that we're going to buy. Some of us like to know what is the lifetime carbon impact of this decision I'm making. And large, unique, continually refreshed data sets will drive new business models. So that's what I learned from the GTO. So gathering new data is really important, and there's a lot going on in this space. There's the observation piece I mentioned. This is satellites, this is your cell phones, this is cameras all over the place. This is microphones in your house, this is smart sensors in your house. This borders on creepy. It's on our person, we carry them with us all the time. There's instrumentation of stuff. I have no problem with instrumentation of stuff. I don't care what instruments are on my washing machine. I don't care if Whirlpool knows how often I do laundry or what my preferred setting on it is. Instrumentation of stuff is here to stay. It's going to continue. The reason it's done is the companies that make that stuff want to monitor it to know when it needs to be repaired or replaced so they can sell you more. And if they're going to build a new version of it, they want to know what features are being used and what functions are being used, and they want to be able to identify things, right? The consumer process is being ever more deeply instrumented. So as you go to websites to buy something or reserve something, more and more of that trace data you leave behind is being captured. Things like, how long did your mouse hover here, right? Was your mouse hovering here while you were still at the keyboard and it can tell you're still at the keyboard? Or was your mouse hovering here because you left the computer for a few minutes to go feed the dog or whatever, right? They can start to tell all these things and build these profiles of how you consume. They want to understand search and selection. They want to derive new behavioral segments. The question here is, if I follow a particular path to get to a decision on what car I'm going to buy, who owns that path? Do I own it? Do the various websites I went through own it? Does Chrome, which seems to know what I'm doing every second of my life, own it, or what? And can these paths create new value? Or is it, for me, myself, or is it really just being all done to benefit whoever's on the other side of the screen, right? And then other inferences you can make from digital exhaust. Okay, so I'm going to give you one example of something that I've worked on that I think is an interesting idea for collecting new data. It is multi-criteria choice. Now, we make decisions constantly, right? Most of them are irrelevant. They're not going to have a long impact on our lives, but there are some that are hard choices and maybe have significant impact on our life. If you're a young, just beginning to join the workforce, you have to figure out what new mobile phone to buy. It's a big expenditure. And which do you want? Do you want an old cheap one, a new one? What college to attend? Right? Lots of colleges to consider. They each have their pluses and their minuses, which to take. People in my stage of life are looking at what investments to make, trading off security for growth and things like that. And for people with illnesses, it's what medical treatment to take. There's lots of different ways to treat most illnesses. They have different side effects. Each of these choices has a lot of different attributes, and how I view the attributes may be very different than how you view them. Right? I may care way more about growth in my financial portfolio than someone my age should. So the model we used is, here's all your choices. They all compete on lots of different attributes. Typically, if you just do a search to show me everything, it's going to present things to you in an order. An order implies something, right? Screen position implies something. We don't want that. Many alternatives, all seemingly both similar and different, multiple attributes for each. Faceted search, filters, all that stuff that's out there is helpful, but it's probably not enough to help you narrow things down. And how do you know what facets I want? How do you know what filters I want? So what we did is build a system that lets the user specify their limits and ordering for the criteria. So if it's price, I may say min and max I'm willing to spend. If it's, let's do colleges, I only want to go to colleges in the Northeast. I care about Ivy League, but I maybe care about really good public college more than Ivy League. I care about cost, I care about scholarship availability. I rank these things, and I put limits on some of them, and some of them that are discrete choices I partially order. The first thing we do is we go through this thing and we filter it. So we throw away anything that's dominated and anything that just doesn't fit in our feasibility bucket. And we narrow it down to some number of choices, but it's still too many. And so they're all Pareto optimal, meaning none of them dominates any other. It's all apples and oranges and pears and lemons and stuff that we're comparing. It's not the big apple versus the little apple. And then we graph these. And we're not putting them as a list. We're putting them as points in a plane, where position says how well did they score against the attribute, and each point is actually a pie chart that shows the details on each attribute. And then the most important thing we do here is we give navigation capability. We let you move sliders back and forth. We let you toggle things on and off. We let you manipulate your filters, in a sense, till you get down to a small number to consider. And then we provide full detail and ranking on each aspect for these. So this is a really cool tool. It's useful in picking the college. It's useful in marketing campaigns. It's useful in medical treatment selection, when you've got cost and location and duration, side effects all to consider, as well as efficacy. But the exhaust that comes off of this is, how did I move these sliders? Which one did I adjust first? Did I care about cost first? Did I care about quality first? Did I care about efficacy first? All right? Did I move it way in and then bring it slowly back out? What options did I turn off? You essentially capture the details of my thought process in narrowing down choices, if you instrument this correctly. So we now have another set of data. It's a bunch of user paths, paths to decision. What was the process they took to get to this decision? Is that useful data? I would argue it's probably pretty useful for customer segmentation. You can figure out things from this that you could not figure out from just their transactional behavior or just their demographics. I would also argue that it maybe gives you, as an enterprise, the opportunity to create some better choices, to tell from the path, this person was clearly looking for something I don't have. Maybe I should have one. Maybe I should design a new product, create a new offering in this space. And then from my personal point of view, I like to have an algorithm for everything. So at dinner last night, there was salmon on the menu, I'm ordering it. It was real easy, all right? And I like that for almost everything in my life. But there's some things I don't know how I decide these. And if I could have access to my paths as to how I've made this decision, this could give me insight about myself and make my life a lot easier and make other decisions much more quickly. So a couple other things just before we close here. You could probably use data to train a computer to do an awful lot of stuff. I think the question we all should be grappling with is, what should you train it to use? And there's a lot of factors coming into this. The one I am most focused on right now, and this is probably because of my career, is, can just the data, just the examples ever replace the good old optimization algorithms we like to use for things like production planning, for things like shortest path finding, for things like pricing, for things like assigning crew to airplanes, that are all big optimization models we know and love. Should they be replaced? Could they be replaced? There's also questions on the data. So this is where I spend a lot of time with the companies I consult with, trying to talk them through what data they have and is it enough. And the biggest problem that they have is almost no company I know is in steady state. It's constantly changing. So if you try to view its data, like the games of Go were viewed when the alpha computer was able to win at Go, the rules of the game are changing. The size of the board is changing, right? The possible moves are changing all the time, and the value of them is changing all the time. Do you ever have enough history to learn from? And do you even know, for the history you do have, whether it was the right choice or not? Sometimes you don't know till years later. Sometimes you maybe know the really bad stuff pretty early. You don't know the really good stuff very often. So defining positive and negative examples. There's a lot of work with crowdsourced data. That's the cheapest, most readily available data right now. The question I struggle with here is, how hard would it be to contaminate the data? If I really wanted to take on a concerted effort to contaminate some set of crowdsourced data, how hard would it be? How many co-conspirators do I need? How long is it going to take us? And is the other side ever going to be able to detect that we've done it? Okay, creating data, it's expensive. It happens only well in stylized situations like playing Go. And it has its place, but I don't see that working in the enterprise. In the enterprise, you're stuck with the history you have. You have what you did. How much is that exploitable? How much of what you did 2 years ago is relevant to your business today? Have you labeled good and bad examples correctly? Do you even admit that you have bad examples? You know, most companies don't like to admit that this was a pricing screw-up, right? Or this is a product we never should have taken to market. And the simple question I'm working on as a research project right now is taking the easiest operations research problem I know, minimum cost spanning tree. It's a greedy algorithm. You basically sort the edges by length, and you start with the cheapest and throw it in, and you keep doing that until you find a cycle, and then you ignore that one and you keep going. And it works, and it's order n log n. And it's been known for years, and I teach it to my freshmen, and they actually get it. Can we train a computer to do that? Can we train it with supervised learning? Can we train it with reinforcement learning? How many examples is it going to take? We have a research project underway to understand this, and once we get that understood, we're going to move on to the next hardest combinatorial optimization problem, and the next hardest, to really try to build this picture of, are computers ever really going to replace proven exact mathematics?